On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, From Crash to Cash Flow. So, welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Shawn Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, George Curbello. How you doing, George?
Shawn, how are you? Doing well. Just hanging out, man. I had a good week meeting with some clients, and it's always good to help folks get a plan together so they can move forward with what they're trying to do with their money. So that's always, I mean, it sounds weird. It's fun. It's always fun to try to organize some of this stuff, but it is kind of fun to help people, and it was a good week like that.
Good, and I have an idea for an upcoming show that you and I are going to talk about based on medical debt, but it's a personal issue. But I am happy to say that after my own personal little cancer scare here lately, doctor gave me a clean bill of health, prescribed me some antibiotics, and I am completely negative for any signs of cancer.
Woohoo! That's good news to hear, man.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of scares and stuff like that as we get older, but it's always good to when the doctor is giving you good news, we'll give them a hug once in a while.
And I'll have the medical bills to prove it, so we can talk about that on an upcoming.
We'll help you. We'll help you pay those down.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. So, but one of the things that we don't take for granted in our health is our ability to focus, and that's where I do want to mention the show's sponsor, Magic Mind. So thank you again, Magic Mind. If you want to try some Magic Mind, you can go to their website, magicmind.com/crushing20. Crushing20 is our code. You can follow that link. You can enter that code for 20% off. Regardless of how tired I've been, I take my Magic Mind, and that always helps me power through the day. I realize when I get up at 5 in the morning and start working, by 3 o'clock, 3:30, I've been going for 10 hours, and Magic Mind helps me power right through it. And then probably around 6, 7 o'clock at night is when I finally, start to wind down to get the kids to get dinner and get the kids to bed. So, it tastes good.
And that's the important part with it too. It allows, for me, it's always been a good focus throughout the day, but there's no like immediate dip. It's more of just something that I'm able to, it's kind of like sustain, and then I can still sleep. It's not like caffeine where I just need to keep taking it and it gives me that instant jolt. It's something that it's sustainable throughout the day itself. So I definitely appreciate the product itself and what it can do. So for sure, I would say try it, guys.
I take it with my coffee, and it doesn't seem to have any real impact there. And so I take it there. And I got an email from them this morning, as a matter of fact, that our next month's shipment is on the way, so I'll be able to restock you, George.
So I appreciate that.
But I do want to get to our guest. We have a guest on this week's show. So our guest is an investor, a podcast host, an author, and a local guy. Local here to the Tampa Bay area, although we'll talk to him about. I have a feeling he doesn't just invest locally here in Florida, but he is a Florida-based real estate investor, top Apple podcast host, and best-selling author of The Cash Flow Investor, with over $300 million in real estate transactions under his belt. Based on his decades of experience, he's identified mobile home parks and parking lots as the top real estate investments in the current market. I'm actually curious about parking lots. The name of his podcast is Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow, where he shares his 20-plus years of experience guiding millions of listeners on how to find and invest profitably in commercial real estate. Under the umbrella of his private equity firm, Sunrise Capital Investors, he makes investments in commercial real estate available to passive investors in order to help them build legacy wealth and achieve financial freedom. So, and he's got an interesting story that kind of prompted the title to this week's episode. But welcome our guest, Kevin Bupp. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey guys, I appreciate you having me here. Excited to be here today. So, Tampa Bay, all of us Tampa Bay residents, excited that it's funny that we're all in the same immediate area, but ultimately are coming to each other, via Zoom on this.
Well, normally George is here in person, but we had to call an audible and record remotely. And had I realized, Kevin, that you were local, I would have just said, let's all three of us, meet at someone's studio, whether it's yours or mine. and knock out the episode. But I do want to give everyone your contact information. So it's Kevin at kevinbupp.com, and I'll put all these in the notes anyway. LinkedIn is your name. Facebook is K Bupp. Instagram looks like Bupp Kevin, and you've got a YouTube page. You've also got the podcast, Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow, which I assume is available. If they're listening to our show, your show is going to be available on the same platform. So, but where I kind of wanted to start, one of the interesting things when I was going over your bio, I've been doing this long enough that I remember the 2008 meltdown, and apparently you do too. So
Still fresh.
yeah, so I wanted to give you a little opportunity to talk about that first.
Yeah, well, I mean, long story short, I've been investing. I've been a full-time investor, more than 2 decades. I got somewhat lucky, I feel, back in when I was 19. Real estate kind of found me. I didn't find it, and it found me during a very pivotal moment in time where I was going to school with no direction of why I was going to school or what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so, long story short, I met a gentleman that introduced me to the business. He was about 25 years older than I. He was actually dating my girlfriend's mom at the time, and that's how I got to know him. And he was a local real estate investor that, business owner. He owned, single family rentals and multifamily rentals, and it just was lived a very different life than that of how I grew up. Both my parents worked full-time jobs, and and I didn't know any business owners or entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs wasn't really a word in my dictionary. I just didn't really understand, what that lifestyle was like. But long story short, I started working for him for free just for about a year and a half. I just, committed to helping him in his business any way possible. And I learned a lot during that process, and I started buying real estate as an investment when I was 20. And so my early 20s had the opportunity to really learn the business, but scale in a fairly significant way in my early to mid 20s. And the reason why I give that part of the story is that kind of leads up to 2008 and the crash in 2008. And so at that point in time, I had been hustling. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, and so all I had was work and the opportunity to really grow a business, and just put forth all the energy and effort and time that I had and resources into growing this business, and was, in my mind, quite successful. Again, in that early stage of my life, early to mid 20s, and was down here in the Tampa Bay area. I didn't start here, started in Pennsylvania, moved down here in 2002. In 2002, if thinking back, that was really the start of the run up of the real estate hype,
Right.
and not just Tampa Bay, but in Florida in general. And lots of unique loans that were available. No documentation loans. 100% financing, 110% financing. You get money back at closing, and just it really drove the real estate values. And so that was a time when I started building this portfolio here, and ultimately leading up to 2008 had over 120 single family rentals and a few hundred apartment doors. And again, my mind was quite successful. Was making a good amount of money on cash flow. On a monthly basis, and felt that I had figured life out. And long story short, you guys, again, you mentioned that you still remember, what the world looked like, but more specifically, what Florida and the real estate market, what ultimately happened in some of these areas where it was kind of ground zero. The impact wasn't as substantial across every market in the country, but it was in some of the inflationary markets. A lot of coastal
Right.
markets, all of Florida, Tampa, Orlando, Miami, Jacksonville. California was a big one, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Arizona. There were some areas that just saw so much inflation and just growth from a real estate perspective, and it completely got flipped to 180. And so, literally within a year period of time, I went from having cash flow on my portfolio to basically having to write checks for $20,000 and $30,000 a month because I was negative. What happened? Florida was really driven. There's a lot of jobs were construction related jobs, right? There's all these homes being built that, when the music stopped, folks didn't have jobs. We had a somewhat of an exodus for a period of time. People moving out of Florida because there was no work available, and we had an excess supply of housing. And so what happened to me was that things were great leading into it, and then ultimately what happened is values went down. There was more inventory than there were bodies available to rent homes, and so we went from being 98% occupied to down in the 80% of occupancy. And at that point in time, cash flow was negative. It wasn't positive. And so it was a very, very challenging couple of years. I ultimately had to strategically default on the majority of the portfolio. And it was tough because back then, today's a little different. Banks and lenders have loss mitigation departments. They have workout plans in place, and all that really stems from '08.
Right,
None of them
right.
had that in place. None of them had ever dealt with such a substantial upset within the mortgage industry. And so, that first year or so, banks weren't willing to work with me. They weren't willing to restructure debt. They weren't willing to give concessions or maybe deferments of payments. And so I basically lost within a year and a half period of time. I literally lost everything. Was in foreclosure on my primary residence. Had my
Wow.
bank accounts garnished. All my credit cards cut me off, not because I defaulted on them, but because I was defaulting on my mortgage payments. And so basically, I went from having a ton of credit available, money in the bank, to literally negative in the bank, no even credit that I could rely upon, and no income. And so it was a very challenging time, to say the least. And I'll stop there in case you guys have any questions related to that. But and on top of it, I guess to add one other layer is that if you guys recall, I felt we had low leverage on our real estate portfolio. From a balance owed on debt to what values kind of peaked at, we were pretty low. I mean, roughly about 60% loan to value across our entire portfolio. And so one would say that very little risk. However, within a year period of time, 85% of that portfolio was completely upside down, from a valuation standpoint. So, you guys remember, values got crushed.
Yeah.
Homes that were selling for $200,000 now we're selling for $60,000 and $70,000, and so, and if they were selling at all, they were moving very slowly. So, I'll stop there.
So one of the questions that I had was, how did you hold title or control? Were these all were some of them like subject to transactions? Were some of them where you just outright bought the house? Conventional finance, hard money finance? Were they wholesales? Were they lease options? Were they how did you comprise your portfolio back then?
That's a great question. We're all about creative strategies. However, I would say on the buy side, most of it was pretty straightforward. So a lot of times what we would do, we had a number of private lenders that we had built relationships with over years. Because conventional, you're really limited as far as how many loans you could have from a conventional sense. That might be different today. I don't necessarily follow that market to what it was back then, but there wasn't a lot of opportunities to scale a rental portfolio using conventional debt back then. And so we established relationships with a number of high net worth individuals that would act as the bank. And so our typical strategy was we would use that private money to go in and buy the home and also rehab the home. And then we would do that with 4 to 5 and sometimes up to like maybe 7 homes. And once we've renovated them, stabilized them by getting a renter in place, we would go get a commercial loan on a package of homes. Again, somewhere between 4 and 7 homes. We would go to a number of local banks that we had relationships with, and basically get a commercial loan on that small portfolio. And so we had a number of like kind of small portfolios that were underneath the umbrella of one individual commercial loan.
Got it.
And so that's typically how we did it. Yeah.
Got it. That's interesting. So,
and then on most of it was rentals, but however on the exit side, sometimes we would offer lease with options to buy, within our portfolio for those that kind of want to live the home ownership dream, but maybe didn't have the credit or financial ability today to get a conventional loan. So we do a lease with an option, and it give them time to, whether it be repair their credit, fix their credit, save up for a down payment. It give them the option to buy that home at a future date. But most of our business was fairly conventional.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me is that at the time, most real estate investors were trying to get control of the property. So we want control. And so if the borrower had a loan in place, they would just take control of the property, get the deed to the property, but leave that old mortgage in place. And then when values crashed and they couldn't keep up, the rental income either was non-existent or was less than the mortgage payment, I saw a ton of real estate investors that lost everything because although they had the deed and they had control, it wasn't their mortgage. And so when things went south, there was no way for them, banks wouldn't let them, what early loss mitigation there was, the banks were saying, no, you're not a borrower. We're not going to do it. The interesting thing.
and then they didn't have any equity at that point. So
Right.
obviously, like what you're speaking to is they wouldn't allow them to do a loan modification or anything like that. So, and that's the reason why we didn't do a lot of subject twos. What we found is that you might be able to, we might find a home that's a nice home we could take a subject to, and maybe there's 15% equity in it, but that wasn't enough of a buffer for us to feel comfortable knowing that we could actually make money. Yeah, we own the home, we controlled it, but can we get a positive cash flow on a monthly basis from it? And can we truly make money once you factor in, all the variables that exist with only 10 or 15% equity going into it? And what we found is that we couldn't. There was more risk than there was reward. Not a lot of risk from like our credit perspective, but like we got to put resources towards buying these and just owning them, managing them, handling repairs and maintenance. It looks good on paper that we've got additional homes, but like if we can't make money, like why are we doing it? And so that's why we didn't do a lot of the subject to stuff, just because there wasn't typically a lot of equity there, and a lot of times the loan wasn't even a great term. They weren't great terms. You're kind of stepping into it and not really doing it for more than anything of like, if it keeps appreciating, I'll make money if I turn around and sell this. But if it doesn't, I basically did it for nothing.
Right. Well, and one of the only reasons I mention it is because I see those subject to deals coming back. I see more and more investors approaching me saying, "Hey, how do I do a subject to deal on this property?" And as the attorney, sometimes it's a question of who do I represent. If I represent the investor, it may be a great deal. If I represent the homeowner, it may be a terrible deal. So it's just something that I've got to do. But
I think one of the things about today with the subject to, where I think it would benefit, I guess speaking from from the investor's perspective, the good thing is assuming that the home was bought and the loan was put in place, prior to the last 2 years, it probably has some really good loan terms in place, which
right.
probably we'll never see again in our lifetime. If it's got something in the 3 or 4% range, I mean, maybe we'll see it 4s at some point. But again, if you can step into a loan that's got 3.5% interest on it, and it's over a 30-year AM with no balloon in place, just typical conventional loan, then I could see there being a win there, and I could see what the attraction factor might be of trying to find opportunity subject to. But
well, a little bit of a detour, but us real estate geeks understand all this stuff. So you have the portfolio, then we have the crash. I assume you're not still at that economic level today.
No, I'm not, and gratefully, and after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, it took many years. I mean, we're talking quite a long time ago now, and but it did take, there was really 3 to 3.5 years of what I like to refer to as damage control, just trying to manage, and not even stay above water, but just manage the chaos that was happening, trying to sort through the noise and the mess, and not even trying to think about like what the other side looks like. It's just like stuck in the rut, trying to work through it all. And I think the challenge, the biggest challenge I had at that point was everyone I knew within my local sphere and bubble, even guys that I felt were way smarter than I, had been through other cycles. Everyone was in pain and everyone was having challenges, and so it was really difficult to get out of my own way and look outside the bubble and realize that, well, now there could be opportunity. The old adage of like, you want to buy when there's blood in the streets, right? Well, it's a little difficult to think that way when it's your own blood that's running through the streets,
right? And
so it was really 3.5 years of just. I made a pivot and started focusing just on my health. I'm like, if the one thing I can control is my health, I can't control my finances right now because they're in such a disarray. Can't control lawsuits I'm involved in. Can't control any of this stuff. It's out of my control. All I can do is feel better and feel good. Try to have a mental clarity going into the day to maybe deal with some of the stuff a little better. And so that's really what I did for a number of years until I really started to see the other side. Things started kind of not leveling out per se, but just it calmed down enough to where I had the ability to start looking, through the forest a little bit more, start looking through the trees as to what does the next phase of my life look like. And so that's really what brought me to what we do today, which is, today we have 2 specific focuses, mobile home parks and parking, as you had mentioned, but mobile home parks was really the first, and that's really what helped me rebuild everything. I went on this journey, I guess you could call it. The world looked very different in 2011 than it did in 2007 and 8, right? From a financial standpoint, from an economic standpoint, just the playing field had completely shifted. And so I basically went on this journey, and I went and spoke with everyone I could find that was currently investing, whether they made it through the crash and were investing all the way through it, or maybe they were just getting into the business today, and just trying to understand what's working for them, what strategies is working. What I landed on was like multifamily seemed to be the way for me to maybe scale things back up and get to a bigger scale than doing it one by one with single family homes. And so that's kind of where I put my emphasis on. And that's what led me to mobile home parks. It's multifamily, but just a different form. And so I ended up taking a little bit of money I had. Again, didn't have credit, took a little bit of money I had, and I bought a very first mobile home park after meeting with a guy that owned mobile home parks. He sold me on the idea of why I need to go hunt these down and stay away from traditional multifamily. And I did that. I bought that first mobile home park. It was late 2011 or early 2012 up in Atlanta. It was an REO property, completely vacant. And I bet on myself. I bet on the little bit of money I had kind of saved and scratched together over a couple years. And back then it was, you could get creative financing still. You could get sellers weren't selling their properties, so you could kind of structure things and make it work, make the numbers work at least. And so I did that. That was the first one I bought. Bought it with a partner of mine, and again, that was back late 2011, and turned that around took about 9 months to stabilize it and turn it around. Did a cash out refinance on that one, got all my original money back, and then did it again, and fell in love with the asset class. And it just, again, this is during a period of time where my credit was shot. There's no bank financing really here. Most of it was private lender based of how we were doing these deals, or seller financing, somewhere along those lines. And it took many, many years. I mean, it took even 5 or 6 years of buying mobile home parks and actually just kind of reinvesting anything I made back into the business. And luckily I had a great wife at the time. I met my current wife in '08 when things were completely going haywire. And she stuck by my side and dealt with just, again, having a husband or a partner that ultimately wasn't really contributing to the financially contributing to the equation,
Right.
but stuck by my side, believed in me, and supported me through this rebuild phase. And again, more than a decade later, I feel like we're back on top, and we've done some pretty cool things along the way, but way better than what I think we had built historically. And but it definitely didn't happen overnight. It took many, many years of sleepless nights and wondering whether or not this was going to be it, or if I'd be able to make it through. And so anyway,
Well,
it was definitely a tough times.
yeah, no, and I really appreciate that, because people that I see all the time, I try to tell them, you didn't get into debt overnight. You're not going to get out of debt overnight. Now, maybe it's the function of, something bad happens, bad medical issue, bad, divorce, loss of income, loss of a spouse, whatever. But for the most part, if you're listening to the show, you're not going to fall into debt, in overnight, and you're not going to get out of debt overnight. It is a process. It is something you need to work at. It is something you need to get and work your plan to do. And as Kevin is showing, it is entirely possible. So I appreciate your story. I did have a question though about the parking lot investing.
Sure. Everyone has a question about parking lots, as did I when I stumbled upon that space many years back.
Well, and I guess the obvious question is, are there parking lots that are not attached from a legal title perspective, that are not attached to the buildings that they serve? Is that it?
Yeah, absolutely. And today, a lot of municipalities or local governments, what you find is a lot of those surface lots that aren't attached to something, they probably had a building on them historically, and the building was knocked down. And then back then, zoning ordinances were probably a little different. They allowed them to, they saw the need. Back then, there was always a need for parking cars, right? Like even most cities were very drivable cities, even cities like, New York City, or San Francisco. Today, there's not as many cars necessarily going to the city, and they've got better mass transportation and things like that. But back then, a lot of these surface lots that are not associated maybe with or not attached per the same parcels, maybe like an office building or some other type of building, probably had a building or a structure on them at some point, got knocked down and then just repaved and striped and turned into a surface parking lot. But yes, there are definitely they are that out there. And then same with parking garages. a lot of parking garages that we know of, or that like the folks that are listening that are driving into a downtown area. A lot of times they're affiliated or even connected to or part of a hotel or an office, but there's definitely standalone parking assets that serve a multitude of purposes, not maybe just the office buildings that are near it, but also sports arenas, daytime transient traffic, nighttime light life transient traffic, and a litany of other government buildings and courthouses and things like that. So we own a number of parking, both lots and garages that are kind of like their own. They're standalone, and they weren't built purposely to just serve one thing. They were built to service a multitude of things.
So what you're talking about, I mean, when I first saw parking lot investing, what the first thing that came to my head was, I'm in my office building here. Well, not I rent my space, but the office building here has a parking lot, and so it'd be kind of weird to separate the land on which the building sits from the parking lot. But that's not what you're talking about. If I'm understanding what you're talking about,
That's
it's like when I do go to downtown Tampa to go to a Lightning game or a whatever, and they're the lots that are tied to where they've got the meters out front by the sidewalk, and you plug in your license plate number and you pay for your parking. That's the kind of parking lot you're talking about?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And honestly, it could be both. I mean, we actually own some parking lots that that might have been or still are tied to a retail center or even an office building. But when we buy it, we're not office investors, and while we own retail, we're not really retail investors. So the deal to us, like we underwrite it as parking, and so we got to make the numbers work and the economics work based on just parking alone, and then we look at anything else that's attached to as ancillary, and sometimes not necessarily a positive, right? We don't want to buy office buildings unless we can really get sold on why that parking makes so much sense. I'll give you an example. We bought last year. We bought a fairly large parking garage, basically half a city block in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. The parking garage is a standalone on its own parcel, but it's got a sky bridge connected to a 20-story office building or 24-story office building, and then there's about another 20,000 square feet of ground floor retail. Number one, office is not the place to be. I had no interest in buying the office, but it was a kind of take all or take nothing. The parking garage just happened to be, when I say right across from the courthouse, and in the courthouse in Phoenix, that county, it's the second largest courthouse in the country. It happens to be a stone's throw. Like you can literally, if you cross the street, you're on the curb of the courthouse and the government center there. And then downtown Phoenix is hopping, just like Tampa. Like there's a ton of bars, restaurants, lots of nightlife happening, lots of new multifamily being built everywhere. So just lots of not just daytime traffic, but nighttime traffic. And so the numbers made so much sense with this garage alone that I was kind of like, okay, well, we're basically getting the office for free. Again, not a place that we want to be. Office is, by far the least desirable real commercial real estate investment today, just because COVID happened, people were moving out of the offices, a lot of people aren't coming back. But we basically got it for free. I mean, really, the basis
Right.
that if you looked at the whole deal, we got the office for practically free, and it actually makes money today. Again, not a place we want to be because it's going to be hard to sell it when that time comes. But the numbers, absolutely hands down, without a doubt, made a ton of sense with just the parking alone. And we know that's irreplaceable real estate. Another thing we look at with parking is that we want to know that based on its location, is that the current use today is at its lowest state, meaning that it will have a much higher and better use at some time in the future as something else other than that of parking. And so if we make the numbers work today at its lowest valued use, then really it's only icing on the cake 10, 15, 20 years from now. Maybe when parking is not as desirable or is not needed as much, we know that with the air rights that we have, that inevitably we can redevelop that lot into something of a much higher and better use. And so numbers work today. We'll do a cash flow covered land play, and then some point in the future, we'll do something else with the site.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple of places, even around here in Tampa, where, like you said, it was just pavement with stripes, but now they're building parking garages on those spaces. Presumably, more cars means more revenue, means higher value, means more use. So, okay, wow,
So we actually, and using our backyard as an example, we actually own a parking garage in Clearwater Beach on North Beach, and it was originally owned by the city. We bought it about two or 3 years ago from the city, but it's a standalone parking structure. It was purposely built for parking because there wasn't enough on North Beach It's a fairly large garage. It's 700 and I think 2 spaces in total, and it's got some retail on the bottom floor. But Clearwater Beach is made up of. There's obviously some parking garages in different hotels and things of that nature. They have some excess parking available for like beach goers and things like that. But a lot of the hotels actually don't have excess parking. They've got enough for their the folks that are staying there, their customers, but they don't open up to beach parking. And in Clearwater Beach, there are a number of various surface lots, both in North Beach and South Beach area. However, if you go to, I don't know if you've been to Clearwater Beach lately, South Beach, probably half of those surface lot that used to encompass hundreds of parking spaces are no longer there. They're going vertical. It's a hotel or something else that that's ultimately taking away the parking supply. And what's happened as well, you probably know this, being real estate, a lot of cities in the municipalities, they've taken away the parking space minimum requirements, meaning that historically, if a developer is going to come in and build condos or a hotel, whatever it might be, they would have to put X amount of parking spaces per every 1,000 square feet. They would always have a formula, and what most cities have found is that they were creating excess parking that wasn't necessary. And so if you take that requirement away, developers realize that they can make way more money. If they can just get one more hotel unit or one more condo unit in there, they're going to build the basic minimum of what they need to serve their base, which is whatever they're building above it. And they're not going to put a bunch of excess parking supply in. And so most cities across the country are actually, it's like a diminishing supply. And so if we can buy, really well located parking today, we know that there's not a lot of new stuff, if any, being built in that local or immediate area. Clearwater Beach, as an example, it's diminishing. It's actually going away, and so it's just more demand for our product. And again, just it serves the long-term investment thesis of there will be a demand, even if more autonomous vehicles come on the road. There will be a continued demand if you buy in the right location where parking is going away.
Yeah. Although the interesting thing, I haven't been to Clearwater Beach in a long time because of the lack of parking.
There you
go. Either it's a combination of the lack of parking and the expense of parking. The last time I went out to Clearwater Beach, I think it was like $20 to park for like a half day, or it was some crazy amount that I was like, we either got to park so far that it's going to be a long walk to get to the beach, or we've got to pay a ton of money to park if we can find space. So we normally go out to Honeymoon Island if we want to go to the beach. We go out. Right. We go out Dunedin. But no, that's super interesting in terms of like I said, my first impression was you're gonna chop off the parking lot of my building and buy that, and which is not at all how it works.
We could, if it was in the right location that had, if it was, smack dab middle of a city and there were sports arenas and musical, venues nearby or government buildings, that absolutely could be a business model. In fact, what we're seeing today is there's a lot of office ownership groups, big groups that might have a surface lot attached to their building, or they might have a parking garage as part of the, a part of the deal. And they're getting their butt kicked so bad with the office that they're starting to look at ways to lower their basis. And so we're working on a negotiation right now on just that. It's a garage that's right next to an office. It was built for the office, but this area that it's in now has a additional diversity of demand drivers for that parking lot. So more than just the office people parking that parking garage. And this owner is looking to lower their basis. Like they're in a bad situation because their occupancy in the office building is 60%. And their lenders looking at calling the loan due, and so they need to lower their basis. They don't have the capital to infuse into it, and so now they're considering selling off the parking, taking that money and paying down the loan to get them in a better situation with their lender. So opportunities like in that situation, we would have to split the parcel into two, create a new parcel ID for the parking, and then it would be on its own lot.
Which
that definitely could happen.
Yeah, I mean, again, tying it into what you originally talked about, tying it into your story, is that it's something that you don't really consider is who owns the land on that I'm parking my car on, and what opportunities are there to rebuild, to recover from the, we are far enough away from the crash that a lot of us have recovered, but we're still close enough to it to remember. I don't think, people keep talking about what's the current real estate market doing. I don't know that it is ever going to crash as bad as it did. And I think everybody held a hand in it. Everybody from investors, banks, buyers, sellers, title companies, realtors, appraisers. Everybody takes a little bit of piece of the blame for what happened in '08. But I think what's great about your story is figuring out how to recover, which is in essence what this show is all about. How do we recover from some of those setbacks? So I really appreciate you being a guest on this week's show. Is there anything we didn't talk about? Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think just, as far as like recovery, I mean, I think just, at least for me, what really worked is if you don't have money, you don't have credit, and you're trying to, rebuild or trying to create a new lifestyle or start a new business. I think as long as you're open-minded and you get really good at identifying opportunity, and you can clearly articulate that opportunity to someone else that has money, I think that's where the value comes in. If you don't have money, don't use that as an excuse. If you don't have credit, don't use that as an excuse, because what you do have is your brain. And if you can curate your mind to start thinking of, is this an opportunity, whether it's real estate or a business, whatever it might be, identify opportunities, assuming you have money, identify opportunities that are just great deals. You can make money from it. There's growth opportunities, and then be able to clearly articulate that business model or your vision to others that have money. Because I can tell you that there's plenty of people that have money that are looking to find a home for it.
Yeah.
And they're a little too lazy at this point. Maybe they got lazy because they got the money, and they want people like that. They want the hustlers to go out and actually find the opportunities for them so that they can put the money in, be the money person, benefit from the deal, but not necessarily be the guy in the trenches doing the hard work. And, if you want to get back on top, you got to do the hard work. And I think that's how you do it if you don't have money or credit.
Yeah, they'd much rather give you their money at 7, 8, 9, 10% or more than have it sit in a CD earning 1%, 2%. So
every single one of our investors, that's who we bring money in from. Our company brings money in from high net worth investors that have a multi-million-dollar net worth. And they're just that. They're business owners. They're professionals like doctors, lawyers, folks like yourself that they've got their own practice. Like, they're doing well. They're making really good money, and whatever their career is, again, whatever that might be. But they need to diversify. They want to get invested in real estate, but they just don't. Number one, maybe they don't have the time. Maybe they don't have the inclination. They don't have the skill set to actually do it themselves. They've got the money. They just don't want to do the other part of the equation.
Right.
Be the other part of the equation. So, like myself and our team, we're the ones that are out there identifying opportunities. We're in the trenches. We're doing the so-called dirty work, and we're giving them a return on their investment as a result of that.
Right. And if you're listening and you want to learn more about that, definitely connect with Kevin. You can get his book, The Cash Flow Investor. You can listen to his podcast, Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow. I know you've got mobile home investing resources. You've got the parking lot investing resources. We'll put all of those connections within the notes here, so you can definitely connect with Kevin if you want to, if you need to. But I think that's gonna kind of put a bow on today's show. So, Kevin, I really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, Shawn, thanks for having me, man. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you.
Yeah, and definitely, since we're both local, we probably need to hook up at some point.
I agree.
So,
I agree with that.
George is having technical difficulties, so I will say goodbye on George's behalf as well. I did want to mention again our sponsor, Magic Mind. And again, you can go to magicmind.com/crushing20, and that will give you 20% off your first order. You can order 15, you can order 30, you can order monthly subscriptions, but that code crushing20 will give you 20% off. Also want to mention our Patreon page. So you go to patreon.com/crushingdebt. That's our page. And again, our longtime sponsor, our longtime friend, Sam Cohen with Attorneys First Insurance. If you're an attorney or title company and you need malpractice coverage or E&O coverage, definitely give Sam a buzz, sam@attorneysfirst.com. But I think that will do it for this week's episode. I think I'll get George back into the studio live for next week's episode so we can figure out any technical glitches we've got going on there. But I will say goodbye on my behalf, on George's behalf. Thanks again for Kevin. We do hope that this episode shows you that it's possible to have more money at the end of the month rather than month at the end of the money. And we will talk to you in next week's episode of the podcast.